The boy stood outside for exactly 10 seconds, not because he was afraid of the cold, though November had settled hard into Clarkton that week, the kind of cold that found the gaps in a thin hoodie and made itself at home there. Not because he was working up courage either. Courage was a word that belonged to people who had choices. Cody Marlowe had already used up his choices at two other stops that morning, a gas station on Route 9 where the attendant had looked at his cast and then looked deliberately away, and a grocery store 3 blocks east where a woman in a red vest had followed him with her eyes from the moment he walked in until the moment he walked back out, empty-handed, into the gray Missouri air. 10 seconds was how long he needed to read a room through glass. I did it the same way every time. Start at the back corners, work forward. Count the exits, 2 front door and a side door near the restrooms. Count the adults, 14, not including staff. Count who was looking at their phone, who was looking at their food, and who was looking at everything else. The ones looking at everything else were the ones that mattered. Not dangerous like Glenn was dangerous. Dangerous like people who noticed things and then decided what to do with what they had noticed. 2 women near the window, early 40s, both with that particular stillness that meant they were the type to ask questions out loud in front of other people. A man by himself at the counter, broad-shouldered work boots, reading something on his phone with the focused expression of someone who wanted to be left alone but was too tired to enforce it. A family in the big center booth. Parents, 3 kids, the controlled chaos of people managing too many small humans to pay attention to anything outside their own orbit. And in the far back corner, a table for 2, 1 chair, 1 man. Cody's eyes stopped there. He had learned not in any classroom, because he hadn't been in a classroom in 14 months, but in the long and ungentle education of living in Glenn Pruitt's house, that the most dangerous-looking person in any room was rarely the most dangerous person in any room. Glenn Pruitt wore clean-pressed shirts and smiled at neighbors and coached a youth soccer team 2 towns over, and was the kind of man who remembered the names of waitresses and left decent tips. Glenn Pruitt was the most dangerous person in any room he entered. The man in the back corner of the Millhaven diner looked like someone had built him out of old leather and hard winters. He had tattoos running up both forearms like dark rivers, a gray beard, cut close shoulders that suggested a history of physical work, and a leather vest over a flannel shirt with a patch Cody was too far away to read. He was eating chili and reading a folded newspaper, doing both of those things, like a man who had long since stopped needing to justify himself to anyone in his vicinity. No one was sitting near him. 2 tables on either side empty, even though the diner was running about 2/3 full. People had sorted themselves by instinct, leaving a quiet perimeter around the man in the corner, the way water moves around a rock. Cody thought he doesn't have anything to hide. People who have things to hide smile. They make themselves friendly. They need you to like them. He pushed open the door. The warmth hit him first, then the smell, coffee and fryer grease, and something sweet from the pie case near the register. And underneath all of that, the particular human warmth of a room full of people who had somewhere to be and enough money to buy a meal while they figured out how to get there. Cody stood just inside the entrance and breathed it in without meaning to. His body did it before his brain could decide whether it was appropriate. His body had been cold for 3 months, the kind of cold that lives in uninsulated garages in November, the kind that a single thin blanket folded in half cannot touch. And the warmth of the diner moved through him like a door opening somewhere deep inside his chest that he had forgotten was there. I had been in Glenn Pruitt's house for 14 months. He had moved in 11 days after the funeral when the social worker had walked him through the intake paperwork, and Glenn had signed everything with the careful penmanship of a man who understood that signatures were performances, and performances required an audience. The social worker had been young and overworked, and had asked Cody in the parking lot while Glenn waited by the car whether he felt safe. Cody had said yes. He had said it because he did not yet know what Glenn was. He had said it because, at that point, Glenn had only been the man who showed up at school events and birthday parties, and who brought Christmas gifts that were slightly too expensive in the performative way of adults who wanted to be remembered as generous. He had said it because his parents were dead, And the alternative to Glenn's house was a system he had heard adults describe in voices that made it sound like a last resort. And Cody had not wanted to be a last resort. He started walking. His left leg had been wrong for 3 months. Not wrong in a way that was getting better, wrong in a way that had settled in and made itself at home. Because the thing about a broken hip that never got properly treated was that the body tried to compensate for it, redistributing weight, shifting the entire architecture of movement. And after long enough, the compensation itself became a kind of permanent alteration. He walked with a lurch that he had stopped being embarrassed about because embarrassment required an audience that cared, and the only audience he had had for the past 3 months had been Glenn. And Glenn's reaction to the limp was not embarrassment, but something that looked, when Cody caught it, in unguarded moments, like satisfaction. The crutch helped. It was secondhand metal with worn rubber grips, and it had belonged to someone else before it belonged to Cody. There were the ghosts of stickers on the lower shaft, picked off, but not entirely gone. The sticky outlines of cartoon characters he couldn't identify. The cast on his right arm was the original one from 3 months ago, when the emergency room doctor had set the fracture, and Glenn had stood just behind the doctor's left shoulder the entire time, with the particular stillness of a man communicating something without words. The cast had been white once. Now it was gray-beige, soft at the edges, the surface covered in the signatures of children from a school he no longer attended. Kids who had thought a broken arm was something temporary and exciting, who had not known they were signing something that would become a record of all the things that had not happened afterward. No follow-up appointments, no cast removal, no second x-ray to confirm the healing. Because those things cost money, and the money in the trust fund established after his parents died was something Glenn managed, and Glenn's management style did not include spending it on Cody. He tried the first booth. Two men in work shirts, lunch plates between them, laughing at something with the easy physical comfort of men who had known each other long enough that silence between them was also acceptable. Cody stopped beside the table, and one of the men, the closer one, heavy set with a company logo on his chest pocket, turned his shoulder away before Cody even opened his mouth. Not aggressively, not unkindly, even in the conventional sense. Just the particular movement of a person who has registered something in their peripheral vision and decided to reclassify it as not their concern, the way you adjust your eyes on the highway when something on the shoulder catches your attention and you choose not to look directly at it. Cody stepped back and kept moving. He didn't let it reach his face. He had been practicing for 14 months and he was getting very good at it. The second booth, a woman in her late 60s with white hair, pinned up her granddaughter across from her coloring books and crayons, spread across the table in the cheerful disorder of a child who had been given permission to make a mess. The little girl looked up at Cody with the frank curiosity of someone who had not yet learned that staring was considered impolite. The grandmother saw Cody's cast, saw the crutch, saw something in his face that made her own face do a complicated thing. A flicker of something that might have been recognition or pity, or the fear of pity, or just the discomfort of being asked to care about something unexpected in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday. And then she produced the kind of smile that was shaped like welcome, but functioned like a door being closed. "We're waiting for someone, sweetheart," she said. She pulled the coloring book a little closer as she said it, not because she meant to, probably, but because the body does things the mind has not approved yet. Cody said okay. He said it the way he said most things now, flat, quiet, without edge, and he kept moving. Third booth, three women somewhere between 50 and 60, the organized and cheerful type that gathered on weekday afternoons in diners all across Missouri. Women who ran the committees and remembered the birthdays and maintained the social infrastructure of their communities with the particular competence of people who were good at it and knew it. They had iced teas and a shared slice of pie, and they were laughing at something when Cody stopped beside them. The laughter didn't stop exactly, but it stuttered the way a clock stutters in a power flicker. And one of them, the one facing the door with reading glasses pushed up on her head, said not quietly enough to the woman beside her, "Where are his parents?" Not to Cody, about Cody. The way you speak about an animal that has wandered somewhere it shouldn't be. Cody's fingers found the thing in his hoodie pocket. He touched it without taking it out, cool metal rectangular, the dull weight of a motel key fob, brass with a number stamped into it. He had been carrying it for 3 weeks. He had taken it from the inside pocket of Glenn's winter coat on a Thursday night 3 weeks ago, while Glenn slept on the living room floor with the particular deep unconsciousness of a man who had consumed a significant quantity of bourbon and was not going to be a concern for the next several hours. He had known the key was there because he had watched Glenn pocket it 6 weeks before, that had watched Glenn's hand go to it the next morning, the way hands go to things they need to confirm are still there. He had heard what Glenn said on the phone that same night. He had been in the hallway in his socks in the dark, listening. Glenn thought the hallway was too far. Glenn had not accounted for the particular attentiveness of a child who had been learning to hear things clearly for his entire life, and especially for the past 14 months. The key was his evidence, his only one. He had been waiting for the right person to give it to. He turned toward the back corner. The man was still adding his chili. His left hand rested flat on the table. His right held a spoon. He had a coffee cup to his right, ceramic nearly empty, and his newspaper was folded to an interior page. Not the front, not sports, something in the middle. He was doing all of it with the unhurried completeness of a man who ate chili at a corner table because he wanted to eat chili at a corner table, and that was the end of the justification required. Cody crossed the diner. Later, the people who were paying attention would say that the boy walked differently toward that back corner than he had walked anywhere else in the room. That he walked with purpose rather than the careful hesitance of a child afraid of being turned away again. One of the three women from the third booth, the one who had asked about his parents, would say later that she watched him walk across that room and felt something shift in her chest that she could not name precisely. Something like watching a person make a decision in a film before you know whether it will work out for them. Cody stopped beside the table. The man looked up from his newspaper. His eyes were gray or possibly a very dark blue, the kind of color that the light in a diner on a November afternoon is not strong enough to settle. They were not unkind eyes. They were not particularly warm either. They were the eyes of someone who looked at things directly, which was already different from every adult Cody had encountered that day. "Sir," Cody said, "can I sit with you just until my legs stop shaking?" He said it the way he had rehearsed it. Not too much explanation, not dramatic, not small either. He had been saving this sentence, not these exact words, but the weight and shape of them, for weeks. He had been waiting to say it to the right person. He had been wrong twice about who the right person was at two other locations on two other days, and those failures had cost him something he couldn't fully name, but could feel in the way he checked the clock compulsively now. It was currently 3:48 in the afternoon. Glenn would be sober by 5:30. He would notice the key was gone by 5:45, and from 5:45 forward, everything became much harder and much less predictable. The man did not look around the diner to see if anyone was watching. He did not look at the cast, or the crutch, or the shoes which were worn through at the toes and held together at the left heel with a strip of duct tape that had been there long enough to turn gray. He did not perform the calculation that the other adults had performed, the rapid and visible arithmetic of social cost versus social benefit, the small and deeply human triage of other people's inconvenient need. He looked at Cody, then he reached down with one boot and pushed the empty chair out from under the table. He did it slowly, the way you ease a boat away from a dock when the water is calm and there is no particular hurry. "Sit down," he said. His voice was low with a roughness that sounded like accumulated years rather than illness, and it contained exactly nothing that Cody needed to be afraid of. Cody's shoulders came down. He had not known they were up. He had been holding them somewhere near his ears for so long that the position had stopped registering as tension and had simply become the shape of his body, the posture of someone who had learned to make themselves small in enclosed spaces. When the man said, "Sit down," something in him released, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the way that something releases when the pressure holding it has finally equaled the pressure against it. Just that. Just enough. Just balance. He moved toward the chair. His left hip caught at the angle. It always caught a specific and reliable betrayal of that joint which he had mapped precisely over 3 months of learning to live with it. And the crutch slid on the linoleum and the world tilted and Cody was following the crutch, going sideways with a crash that split the noise of the diner, the way a rock splits still water. Sudden and echoish, and followed immediately by the specific silence of a room full of people who have stopped their own conversations to find out what happened. Heads turned. The cold went through Cody's stomach. Not from the fall, he had caught the edge of the table with his good hand and hadn't gone all the way down, but from the attention. In Glenn's taxonomy of acceptable and unacceptable behavior, making a scene occupied the highest possible rank of unacceptable. Drawing attention was the same as announcing yourself, and announcing yourself was the same as making yourself available to questions. And questions were the specific thing that Glenn's entire operation depended on not receiving. Cody had internalized this so completely that even now, even a mile and a half from Glenn's house, his body responded to public attention with the same animal contraction as it responded to a direct threat. The man was already standing. Cody had not seen him move. One moment he was sitting, the next he was upright, and he had the crutch in his right hand, and his left hand was at Cody's elbow. Not gripping, not pulling, just present, solid and specific as a load-bearing wall. He set the crutch back upright and positioned it within Cody's reach, and his hand stayed at Cody's elbow until Cody had found his balance, and then it withdrew. No announcement, no making a production of it, just the action, clean and complete. Easy, he said, quiet enough that only Cody could hear it. You're all right. Nobody's touching you. Cody looked at him. The man looked back, not with pity, not with the complicated mixture of alarm and inconvenience that adults usually produced when Cody fell or stumbled. Just steady, just present, like a man who had seen a kid lose his footing before and understood that what the kid needed in the next 30 seconds was not to be made into a story about losing his footing. Cody got himself into the chair. The man sat back down and picked up his spoon and returned to his chili as if nothing had interrupted either of them, which was Cody understood the correct thing to do. The fact that he recognized it as the correct thing told him something about how thoroughly in 14 months he had learned to read adult behavior. A woman appeared beside the table. She was in her early 60s with a face that had been pretty 20 years ago and was now something more specific. Sharp-eyed, deeply lined with the posture of someone who had spent decades carrying plates across distances without spilling them. Her name tag read Norma. She had a coffee pot in one hand, and she stood at a careful angle, not quite facing Cody, not quite avoiding him, like someone who had not yet decided which way this was going to go. The man raised 2 fingers without looking up from his newspaper. Norma, he said, get him something real, please, not a snack, a meal. Norma's eyes moved from the man to Cody. In Cody's experience, the way adults looked at him in the seconds before they made a decision told you a great deal about what they were going to decide. Norma's look was complicated. It contained assessment, and underneath the assessment, something older, something that looked like recognition, like seeing something she had seen before and had accumulated strong feelings about. But it also contained the particular wariness of a woman who had learned over many years that other people's crises had a way of migrating toward whoever was standing closest. What would you like, hun? She asked. Cody looked at the laminated menu she set in front of him. He had been looking forward to this moment, the choosing. But now that it was here, the menu seemed to require a kind of translation. Each item demanding that he picture it, remembered its taste, verify that his memory of it was accurate. He had not had a meal in the full sense of the word in 4 days. He had eaten crackers from a sleeve he found behind a workbench in the garage, half a can of soup heated on a hot plate. Glenn did not know he had water from the utility sink. Before that, it had been what he could find in the kitchen during the windows, when Glenn was out working around the master lock on the pantry door, which Glenn had installed 6 months ago and explained as keeping things organized. He ordered a cheeseburger, fries, and a chocolate milkshake. Norma wrote it down and went toward the kitchen. Cody placed both hands in his lap, the casted arm resting on his thigh, the left hand curled around the edge of his hoodie pocket where the key fob was, and looked toward the window. The sky outside was the specific gray of Missouri, In November, the color of old dishwater flat, and total in all directions. The parking lot held about a dozen cars and one motorcycle parked near the entrance with the territorial certainty of something that belonged exactly where it was. He checked the clock above the counter. 3:52, 98 minutes. The man turned a page of his newspaper. Cody looked at him. The patch on the vest was readable now, Hill's Angels with a symbol beneath it. Cody knew enough to understand that this meant something specific about belonging, about structure, about the existence of people who would come if you called them. He did not have that. He had not had that for 14 months. Name, the man said. He said it without the usual adult ritual of offering his own name first, without the careful tonal padding that people used when asking children things they were worried might frighten them. He just asked directly the way you ask when you actually want the answer. Cody, Cody said. Then Cody Marlowe. The man nodded once, the nod of someone placing something in a location where it would stay. Ray, the man said. And then he returned to his newspaper and Cody returned to watching the parking lot, and for a minute and a half, neither of them said anything, which was Cody thought also the correct thing. The food came faster than he expected. Norma set it down with the precision of someone who had been doing this a long time and took the work seriously. Burger centered on the plate, fries and a paper-lined basket milkshake, tall and cold in a heavy glass. She put a bottle of ketchup beside the fries without being asked and returned to the counter, but she did not go far. She positioned herself at the end nearest their table and found things to do there, wiping the same area twice, rearranging things that did not need rearranging, the industry of someone who wants to remain in a particular location without appearing to be stationary. Cody ate. He ate the way he had learned to eat over the past 14 months, which was with an efficiency that had nothing to do with enjoyment and everything to do with the specific anxiety of food that might not be available again soon. Not frantic. He had learned not to look frantic because frantic drew questions, and questions drew Glenn's hand on his shoulder and Glenn's smooth explanatory voice. He ate with a controlled and rapid thoroughness that would have been invisible to most adults in the room. Ray watched it for approximately 3 seconds, then looked back at his newspaper. Cody knew he had been seen. When the milkshake came, he wrapped both hands around the cold glass and held it for a moment before drinking, and the cold against his palms was one of the most specific sensations he could recall from recent months. Clean, simple belonging entirely to this moment, this glass, this table. Nothing before it and nothing after it that he had to manage. He set it down and looked at Ray. There was a thing he had been carrying for 3 weeks that was heavier than its actual weight. A thing he had been waiting to put down in front of the right person that he had almost put down in front of the wrong people twice and pulled back at the last second. Because he had looked at their faces and known the way you know things when reading faces has become a survival skill that they would not carry it correctly. He reached into his hoodie pocket. He took out the key fob, brass rectangular the size of 2 stacked coins with the room number stamped into it in blocky numerals. 12 and the motel name arcing above, in letters small enough that you had to be close, Lakeport Motor Lodge. He set it on the table between them. He didn't say anything. He looked at Ray. Ray looked at the key. Then he looked at Cody, not at the cast, not at the crutch, not at the worn shoes, at Cody, at his face, with the same directness he had used for everything else, looking at the actual thing in front of him, rather than something more comfortable in the vicinity. The diner continued around them. Conversations ran their courses. Norma refilled someone's coffee at the far end of the counter. The family in the center booth negotiated with their youngest about the consumption of vegetables. The clock above the counter moved its minute hand to 3:58. Cody had spent 3 weeks preparing for this moment, and now that it was here, he understood that the preparation had not been for the words. The words were almost secondary. The preparation had been for the capacity to sit still here, to not take the key back, to not look away from Ray's face, to allow another person to look at him. Really look at him without doing the thing he had trained himself to do, which was to become small and transparent and not worth examining. I was 9 years old. He was in a warm diner in Clarkton, Missouri, on a gray November afternoon, with 94 minutes before the window closed. He had a broken hip and a 3-month-old cast on his arm, and 4 days of inadequate food behind him, and 14 months of things that had no adequate words in front of all of that. He had a brass key on the table that he believed was the beginning of a way out. And he had chosen this man, this specific man, out of everyone in this room because he had looked at every face here, and Ray's face was the only one that wasn't managing something. Ray looked at the key for a long moment. Then he looked back up. "Okay," Ray said. His voice was the same low rough without performance. "Talk to me." Something in Cody Marlowe's chest moved. Not completely, not all at once, but enough. Like a clock that has been running wrong finally finding its correct second. He opened his mouth and began. He started with the key itself, not with the beginning of everything, because the beginning of everything was too large and too old. The beginning of everything was a Wednesday evening in September, 14 months ago, an interstate highway, an accident, a sleepover at his friend Marcus Webb's house, from which he had returned the next morning to a world that had been permanently reorganized. He did not start there because he had learned in the months since that when you needed someone to act, you started with evidence, not history. Evidence was specific. Specific things were harder to dismiss. He had taken the key on a Thursday night 3 weeks ago. Glenn had come home late, not unusual, smelling of cigarettes and bourbon, and something underneath both of those that Cody had come to associate with Glenn's worst nights, a sour chemical edge, like something burning that was not supposed to burn. He had gone to the living room, not unusual, and fallen into unconsciousness on the couch, within 20 minutes, also not unusual. What was different was that his coat had fallen half off him when he went down the inside pocket, coming open, and Cody had been standing in the hallway in his socks, looking at the open pocket and thinking. I had been thinking about evidence for months, about what it needed to be and who it needed to reach, and what form it would have to take to be impossible to explain away. He had understood since approximately the third month in Glenn's house that the problem was not simply that no one would believe a 9-year-old boy. The deeper problem was that a 9-year-old boy's account standing alone was not proof, and without proof, Glenn would simply explain, and Glenn explained things with a fluency that had impressed everyone Cody had ever watched him deploy it on. He had explained the broken hip to the emergency room doctor. He had explained Cody's withdrawal from school to the district office. He had explained the fading bruises on Cody's left wrist to a neighbor who had asked once early in the first month and who had nodded and never asked again. Glenn was the kind of man who generated explanations the way other people generated weather talk, automatically, warmly, with just enough specific detail to sound authoritative. So Cody needed something Glenn could not explain. He had heard the phone call 6 weeks before he took the key. He had been in the hallway outside the kitchen in his socks, standing very still against the wall where the ceiling angled down and created a particular acoustic quality that carried sound further than Glenn understood. He had listened to Glenn's voice, low and certain, working through something with someone on the other end of the line. He had remembered the exact words: "If it looks like an accident, nobody asks questions." He had not understood all of it immediately. He understood more of it now. He had had 6 weeks of cold nights in the garage to turn it over and work it out, and he had arrived at an understanding that made his hands cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. He told Ray all of this, not in a straight line. The story didn't live in him as a straight line. It lived as a collection of specific, hard, cold things, each one complete on its own, and he laid them out in the order they came to him. Ray listened without interrupting, without the sounds that adults made when they were performing the act of listening, the small affirmations, the visible reorganization of sympathy on their faces. He just listened, his coffee cup resting on the table, his newspaper folded, and set aside his eyes on Cody's face. The garage room, the door that locked from the outside, not a padlock, but a deadbolt installed on the exterior surface of the door, which Cody had recognized on the first night as something unusual, and had understood more completely about with each subsequent night. The pantry with the master lock. The utility sink that was the only water source in the garage. The baseboard heater that had stopped working in October and that Glenn had looked at once, said he would fix, and had not fixed. School. He had liked school. He had been genuinely good at it, reading, especially in math, and the specific pleasure of accumulating knowledge of learning things and keeping them. He had liked his teacher, Ms. Farrell, who explained things in a way that made them feel as though they had always been waiting to be understood. He had liked Marcus Webb, his best friend since second grade, whose mother had been the one to sit on the edge of the bed at Marcus's house on that Thursday morning in September and tell him what had happened on the highway the night before. Glenn had called the school district in October of last year, 1 month after Cody moved in, and filed the paperwork for home education. The district had sent a form. Glenn had filled out the form. That had been the end of Cody's formal education. Glenn's homeschooling consisted of a stack of workbooks from a dollar store deposited in the garage room and never referenced again. Cody had worked through all of them himself because working through them was something to do and because learning felt like the one area of his existence that Glenn had not yet found a way to control. The hip. He told it the way it deserved to be told, without decoration, because the facts were sufficient. He had been at the top of the basement stairs carrying a box of old magazines that Glenn had told him to bring down. Glenn had been behind him. Glenn's hand had been on his shoulder, not gripping, just touching, just there and then. Cody had been falling, and the falling had taken a very long time, and it had ended at the concrete floor at the bottom, in a way that made colors appear in his vision and sound disappear from the world for a moment. He had lain at the bottom for what felt like several minutes. Glenn had come down the stairs at a measured pace, had looked at him, and had said, well, that was clumsy. The emergency room was that same night. Glenn had carried him from the car to the entrance with what appeared to be genuine parental distress. He had spoken to the nurses and then to the doctor, a young woman tired with dark circles and a stethoscope with a small bandage sticker on the bell, with the combination of distress and measured practicality that parents of injured children use. Cody had been given something for the pain before the doctor came in, something that softened the edges of things, and when the doctor had crouched beside his bed and asked him what happened, Glenn had been standing just behind her left shoulder. Not in Cody's direct line of sight, just there. Cody had said, I fell. He stopped talking. Ray looked at him with the same directness as before, and Cody looked back and then said, the thing he had not said to anyone, the thing that had been sitting in him since that night, like a stone in a still pond, unmoving, entirely visible to anyone who looked. I knew the truth, Cody said. I just didn't say it, because I looked at his face and I knew that if I said the truth, I was going to go back to the same house anyway. The police would come and then leave. A doctor would make a note, and the note would go into a file managed by someone with too many other files. And Glenn would drive me home. And then it would be just me and Glenn, and he would know I had tried. Ray was quiet for a moment. So you waited, he said. Yes. For the right time. For the right person, Cody said. Something shifted in Ray's expression. Not dramatically, this was not a man whose face did dramatic things. But something deepened in the region around his eyes, some small tightening, the look of someone receiving information that has genuine weight. He looked at Cody's left wrist. Cody had not mentioned the wrist. The sleeve of the hoodie had ridden up slightly when he reached for his milkshake, and the marks there were faded enough now to be ambiguous to most adults. The yellowish remainder of bruising in the particular pattern of a grip, applied too many times with too much pressure, 4-point marks around the circumference of his wrist, like Glenn's handwriting in a language Cody's body had been forced to learn. Ray looked at the wrist and then back at Cody's face and said nothing about what he had seen. He did not make it into a moment. He noted it the way you note a landmark when navigating filed located factored into the calculation going forward. He pushed his chair back. I need to make a call, he said. I'm stepping outside for 5 minutes. I'm going to be visible through that window the whole time. You're going to stay here and finish your food. Cody's hand moved before the thought did. It landed on Ray's forearm, not grabbing just contact fingers against the worn leather of his sleeve. And Cody said, don't go yet. Ray stopped. He looked down at Cody's hand on his arm. Then he did something Cody had not anticipated. He placed his own hand over Cody's, not gripping, not the performance of comfort, just covering it, the way you cover something you want to shelter from something cold. and he said, looking directly at Cody's face, "I'm not leaving. There's a difference between leaving and making a call that's going to help you. Do you understand the difference?" Cody looked at him. "Yes," he said. Ray held his gaze for another second. "Finish the milkshake." And then he stood and walked to the door, and Cody watched him through the window as he stood in the parking lot in the cold exactly where he had said he would be, his phone at his ear and his breath making small clouds in the November air, facing the building so that Cody could see his face the entire time. Norma appeared at the table. She set down a glass of water Cody hadn't asked for and stood with the careful uncertainty of someone who has something to say and is unsure whether saying it is her place. Then she reached into her apron and pulled out a paper napkin, the thick kind doubled, and set it in front of Cody with a pen. Cody looked at her. "In case you need to write something down," she said. Her voice was low and careful, and in it Cody recognized something he had not heard in a while, which was an adult being honest about what they had observed and uncertain what to do with it. "Do you have a napkin instead of the notepad?" Cody said. "Something they won't want to give back." Norma looked at him for a moment with an expression he could not read entirely, and then without another word she produced a doubled paper napkin from her apron and set it in front of him. Cody picked up the pen. He wrote slowly and exactly the way he had rehearsed in his mind many times. The name of the motel, the room number, the date of the phone call as precisely as he could fix it. And then the words themselves, the specific words, the ones he had rehearsed silently every night in the garage until they were worn smooth from handling. If it looks like an accident, nobody asks questions. He set the pen down. He folded the napkin once. He looked up at Norma and held it out. Her fingers closed around it. She looked at it and then at Cody, and her face moved through several things in quick succession: discomfort, recognition, something like grief. And then underneath all of those, something harder and cleaner, the look of someone arriving at a decision. "I'm going to get the manager," she said. "We have cameras. They've been running all day." She put the napkin in her apron pocket and walked toward the back of the diner. Ray came back in. He stamped his boots at the entrance against the cold, crossed to the table, sat down. "Help is coming," he said. 20 minutes, maybe less." "Who?" Cody asked. "People I trust. Not police, not yet. People who know how to handle the space between when something is reported and when something actually changes." Cody thought about that space. He had lived in it for 14 months. He understood its dimensions precisely. "They won't be able to just take me," Cody said. "Not a protest, a fact." "No," Ray said, "but they can make sure the right people are in position before anything moves. So the story is already written before anyone who wants to write it differently gets the chance." This was a more sophisticated understanding of the situation than Cody had expected, and its sophistication was reassuring in a way that simple reassurance would not have been. He did not need to be told everything would be okay. He needed evidence that the person across from him understood how things actually worked. He picked up his milkshake and drank. Outside the window, the parking lot held its ordinary November afternoon. A station wagon pulled in. A man in a quilted vest went inside. The sky continued its flat gray work, losing light at the edges. The way November light went earlier than felt right, darker at the perimeter first. At 4:17, the sound started. Cody heard it before he understood it. A vibration more felt than heard, a resonance in the floor and the window glass and the surface of the table. The kind of signal that the body registers as significant before the mind has finished processing why. Then it resolved into what it was. Engines. Multiple engines. The particular layered thunder of motorcycles in formation, rolling in steadily, not fast, not aggressive, deliberate, the sound of something that had decided to arrive and was not in a hurry about it because it did not need to be. The diner noticed. Conversations lost their footing. Forks paused between plate and mouth. The woman at the counter who had been on her phone lowered it slightly. The three women from the third booth turned to the window in the same moment, like a single organism responding to a change in the air. Through the glass, Cody watched the headlights come into the parking lot, one after another, not stacked but sequential in organized column, and the motorcycles parked in a row along the far edge, with the efficiency of people who had done this in other places for other reasons and knew how it worked. 6 bikes, 7 riders because one of them, the last one in parking at the end, took his time climbing off and removed his gloves. One finger at a time and stood looking at the building the way you look at a situation before you walk into it. Ray had been watching Cody watch this. "That's Anchor," Ray said quietly. "Dean Rourke. He runs the chapter. He's going to come in and talk to you like a person. If you don't want to answer something, say so. He'll respect that." "Does he know what this is?" Cody asked. "He knows enough," Ray said. "The rest you tell him as much as you want." The door opened and a man came in who was perhaps 60, heavy-set, but holding it well with a white beard cut close and eyes that were a pale blue that looked almost colorless in certain lights. He wore the same vest as Ray's same patch, and he moved through the diner without performance, without the particular swagger of men who use their physical size as a form of ongoing communication. He moved like someone who had stopped needing to announce himself a long time ago because the announcement was no longer the point. He came to the table and did not sit immediately. He looked at Cody, not the cast, not the crutch, not the worn shoes. At Cody's face the same way Ray had looked at him, with the same quality of attention that did not slide away towards something more comfortable in the periphery. Cody understood that this was not a coincidence. This was something these men had in common. "Cody," Dean said, a statement, not a question. Ray had told him. "Yes, sir," Cody said. "I'm Dean. Is it all right if I sit down?" Cody glanced at Ray. Ray gave nothing, no signal, no nod, nothing that would remove the decision from Cody's hands. Cody looked back at Dean and said yes. Dean sat. He put both hands flat on the table, visible, unhurried, the deliberate posture of someone choosing to occupy no more space than necessary. "Ray said you have something that needs to be handled correctly," he said. "That's why we're here, not to take over, not to make noise, to make sure that what happens next is what's supposed to happen next." Behind Dean, the man who had come in last and taken a position near the coat hooks without sitting down, was someone Cody had not noticed before. He was somewhere in his late 50s, with the quiet stillness of a person who had spent a long time watching situations unfold and had become very good at it. He carried a worn canvas bag over one shoulder, with the casual habit of a man for whom the bag was simply always present. Ray said quietly to Cody, "That's Doc Ferris. He's with us. He's a doctor. He's not going to examine you without asking first." Doc Ferris nodded at Cody from across the room. Just a nod, nothing that demanded response. A second man had positioned himself near the register without drawing attention to himself. Former law enforcement in the way. Certain men remain former law enforcement indefinitely, in the set of the shoulders and the way the eyes moved. This was Sully Greer, though Cody did not yet know his name. "He wants the trust money," Cody said to Dean. Dean nodded once, not with surprise. "How much?" "I don't know exactly. My parents had life insurance. There's a trust. Glenn controls it until I'm 18, but he gets a percentage to manage my care." Cody said the word care the way you say a word when you have spent considerable time in the presence of its opposite. "He's also been making calls about something else, about another policy. I don't know all the language, but I know what the calls mean." Dean and Ray exchanged a look, brief, lateral, the communication of people who have known each other long enough that a great deal can pass between them in very little time. "The key," Dean said. Cody pushed it across the table. Dean picked it up and held it with the care of someone who understood what it represented, not just a metal object, but the evidence of a decision made under difficult conditions and carried for 3 weeks at considerable personal risk. He read the name. He read the number. "Lakeport Motor Lodge," he said. "Room 12. "I was there 6 weeks ago," Cody said. "He made a phone call in the kitchen that night. I heard him from the hallway. He said if it looks like an accident, nobody asks questions." He looked toward Norma at the counter. "I wrote it down. She has it." Dean followed his gaze, then brought it back. "You wrote it down," he said, "on a napkin. I gave it to her to hold because I didn't want it on me when he came." Something shifted in Dean's expression, a small tightening around the eyes. Not a wince more, like a man revising an estimate significantly upward. Ray said quietly, he chose who to sit with because he'd worked out that the scariest looking person in the room usually doesn't have anything to hide. Dean looked at Cody for a moment. That's correct, he said. Doc Ferris had moved closer during this exchange, drawn naturally toward the table by the conversation, and now he stood at an angle that allowed him to see Cody without standing over him. He looked at the cast the way doctors look at things that concern them, not dramatically, but with a quality of focused attention that was distinct from ordinary looking. Cody, he said, would it be all right if I had a look at that cast? Just look. I won't touch it without asking. Cody glanced at Ray. Ray held Cody's gaze and gave the smallest nod, not a direction, just a confirmation. I'm still here. Cody extended his arm slightly. Doc Ferris crouched beside the chair. He studied the edges of the cast, the discoloration, the place near the wrist, where the material had begun to break down and curl, and where the skin visible along the edge had the redness of something that had been trapped too long against something it should not have been against. He looked at this for a moment without speaking. How long has this been on? He said. Since August, Cody said. Doc Ferris was quiet for a beat. Then he said, this should have come off 2 months ago, maybe more. He did not say it theatrically. He said it the way a doctor states a fact that is not going to change what it is by being stated gently or harshly. There's irritation along the wrist edge, probably some skin breakdown underneath. Tonight we're going to need to look at this properly. He stood and met Ray's eyes over Cody's head, and something passed between them that Cody felt without being able to read it precisely. The communication of people who have confirmed something they both suspected. There was a pause. Cody drank the last of his milkshake. The ice had softened and it was thinner than before, but still cold and still real in a way that things had not felt real for a long time. It was Norma who saw the truck first. She had drifted back toward the end of the counter nearest their table. She kept finding reasons to be in that particular location, and she was looking out the window when the quality of her stillness changed. She went from a woman wiping a counter to a woman who has stopped breathing without deciding to. Cody saw her face change before he turned to the window himself, and what he saw in her face made him turn. A Ford F-150 black late model moving slowly along the perimeter of the parking lot, not pulling into a space, moving along the far row at the speed of someone looking for a specific thing. Cody knew that truck. The cold that he had been managing since he walked into the diner, the one that was not temperature cold but something else, something that lived at the base of his spine and the back of his jaw, arrived all at once, completely the way a wave arrives when you have been watching it build. His hands went under the table. He found me, Cody said. His voice came out even. He was surprised by this. Ray and Dean both turned. The truck parked in the far end of the lot, not in a proper space half on the curb, the kind of parking that communicated that this was not a normal stop. The driver's door opened and Glenn Pruitt stepped out. Clean shirt, pressed dark jeans, gray fleece jacket. He looked as he always looked in public, like a reasonable man managing an unreasonable situation with admirable patience. He closed the truck door without slamming it. Glenn never slammed things in public and stood in the parking lot and looked at the building. His eyes went to the windows, not to the building generally, not a survey of the entrance or the parking lot. His eyes went directly with a specificity that could not be mistaken for coincidence to the back corner of the diner, to the exact table where Cody was sitting. Later, Sully Greer would tell Cody what the exterior camera footage had shown. Glenn had driven past the building twice in the preceding 30 minutes, slowing each time at the window line before finally parking. He had seen Cody through the glass before he ever got out of the truck. He had known exactly where Cody was. He knew where I was sitting, Cody said, before he got out of the car. Dean was already standing. Ray was standing at the same moment, the two of them moving with the synchronization of people who had been in situations before and knew how they worked. Cody, Dean said, stay in your seat. Don't go near the door. Keep your eyes on Ray. Ray sat back down across from Cody, and turned his chair so that his body angled between Cody and the front of the room. Not dramatically, just placement. The positioning of something solid between a thing and what might come toward it. Dean walked to the entrance. He reached it at approximately the same moment Glenn Pruitt arrived at the door, and they met on the threshold with the geometry of two men who have different ideas about who is going to pass through first. Cody watched from the table. I watched Glenn's face do what it did when it encountered unexpected resistance. A fraction of a second of unmanaged expression. Something tight and contained behind the eyes, and then the management engaging the mask, resetting with the smooth speed of long practice. Glenn smiled. It was the smile he kept for situations that required the performance of patience by someone who felt no patience, warm, slightly fatigued, communicating that he was a good man at the difficult end of a difficult day. "Excuse me," Glenn said. He moved to pass. Dean did not move, not aggressively, not with any gesture that could be characterized as threatening. He simply continued to occupy the space he was in, the way a building continues to occupy its footprint regardless of what is asked of it. "Can I help you?" Dean said. His voice was pleasant. Glenn's eyes moved past Dean into the diner, finding the corner, finding the table, finding Cody. Something settled in Glenn when he found Cody a small and specific satisfaction. The completion of a search, and then he brought his attention back to Dean with the focused politeness of someone who has assessed an obstacle and is deciding how to address it. "I'm here for my nephew," Glenn said. He pitched the words to Carrie, not shouting, just enough volume for the tables nearby. "He's been having a very hard time. He left without telling me, and I've been out of my mind with worry. He gets confused. He has some difficulties." "His name," Dean said. Glenn blinked, the kind of blink that is not about light. "Cody," he said. "Cody Marlowe. He's 9 years old. He's in the back corner, and I'd appreciate it if you'd—" And then Glenn said the thing, not because he calculated that it would help him. He said it because, in that moment, under the specific pressure of Dean's immovable presence and the visible organization of men, he had not anticipated. Something slipped past the management for just a moment. "He belongs to me. Not belongs with me. Not he's in my care. Belongs to me." The grammar of ownership applied to a child. Norma at the counter stopped moving completely. The man 2 tables from Cody's looked up from his food and did not look back down. The 3 women from the third booth, who had failed Cody an hour ago and had been watching everything since, went very still. Dean said nothing. From his table, Cody could not hear all the words, but he could read the shape of the exchange, the rhythm of the voices, the way the conversation had hit something hard and reverberated. He could see Glenn's face doing its work, the careful and practiced expenditure of charm. And he could see the moment when Glenn said whatever it was he said that made Norma from behind her counter step out from behind it and walk across the room. She walked with the particular momentum of a woman who has made a decision and is not going to reconsider it on the way to implementing it. She stopped beside Dean on the side, away from Glenn, and she looked at Glenn Pruitt with the face of a woman who had been working this counter for 19 years and had seen many things come through the door and had not always done what she should have done about all of them, and was doing something now. "I've been working this counter for 19 years, she said. "I know what a hungry child looks like. I know what a frightened one looks like. That boy is both." She paused for one breath. "He was standing outside that door for 10 minutes before he came in. I saw him from in here. I thought about going out to ask him why. I didn't." Another pause. "I should have." She reached into her apron pocket and took out the folded napkin and held it to the side, not toward Glenn, not away from everyone, just out and slightly back, as if waiting for the correct hand to take it. Sully Greer, who had been at the register without drawing attention to himself, stepped forward and took the napkin. He opened it, read it, folded it carefully, and put it in a plastic sleeve he produced from somewhere in his jacket. The matter-of-fact preparedness of a man who had spent decades understanding that evidence needed to be preserved before it needed to be presented. Glenn's eyes tracked all of this. His smile was still present. It was doing less work than it had been doing 5 minutes ago. Its structural integrity was compromised by whatever calculation was happening behind it. "I don't know what any of this is," he said. The warmth in his voice had thinned still there, but different the way paint looks when it has been applied too many times over too large an area. Whatever that child has told these people, he has an active imagination. He's had a traumatic year. We both have. He lost his parents and he's been struggling, and I have been doing my absolute best for him. And if something he said has given anyone the impression that, sir, a deputy had appeared in the entrance. He was somewhere in his late 30s, broad through the shoulders with the professional face of someone assessing a scene while still building the context needed to assess it correctly. His eyes moved from Glenn to Dean, to the row of motorcycles visible through the window, to the table in the back corner where a 9-year-old boy sat with a milkshake glass and a cast on his arm and a crutch against the chair beside him. His eyes stayed on Cody. Then they came back to Glenn and Dean. "What's the situation?" he said. Glenn went first because Glenn always went first. He was talking before the deputy had finished the question. Fluent layered the account of a concerned guardian, a troubled child, a misunderstanding these men who had inserted themselves into a family matter. Sully stepped forward. He spoke quietly without urgency in the cadence of a man presenting facts to someone whose job was to evaluate them. "Deputy," he said, "we have a child with visible injuries consistent with long-term physical neglect and abuse. We have a written statement produced by the child himself of specific words, spoken by the guardian, indicating prior planning of harm. We have a motel key taken from the guardian's possession that connects to a location where we believe additional evidence exists. We have a witness who observed the child's condition on arrival. And we have camera footage covering the relevant time period." The deputy looked at him. "Your name's Sullivan Greer, former detective, Holt County Sheriff's Department. Retired." The deputy looked at Glenn. Glenn's smile had reorganized itself into a smaller, harder shape. "This is completely absurd," he said, and his voice was still smooth, but there was something fractionally off in the smoothness. Now the way a floor is fractionally off when something has shifted beneath it. "He's a troubled child. He has a history of this. His therapist has documented it." "His therapist's name," Sully said. Glenn gave a name. Sully wrote it down. The deputy wrote it down. There was something in the act of writing that changed the territory of the conversation, something that communicated to Glenn that the words he was producing had crossed from performance into record. "I'd like to see the child," the deputy said. In the back corner, Ray had not moved. He was sitting across from Cody, and he was not looking at the entrance. He was looking at Cody. Cody was watching Glenn's face from across the room, reading it, the way he had learned to read it over 14 months of close and necessary study. He was watching it change, not dramatically, not in any way that would be visible to someone who hadn't spent considerable time learning its grammar. But it was changing the man who had walked across that parking lot with the settled confidence of someone who had come to collect what was his, was becoming fractionally and incrementally a man calculating whether the exit was still available. The deputy was walking toward him. Cody set the key fob on the table in front of his place and put both hands flat beside it, palms down, the posture Dean had used when he sat across from Cody, the deliberate and honest occupation of necessary space. He looked up at the deputy as the man approached and crouched to eye level and said, "Son, my name is Deputy Callum. I'm not here to take you anywhere you don't feel safe. I just need to understand what's happening. Can you tell me in your own words?" Behind the deputy, beyond the tables and the booths, and the ordinary furniture of a Tuesday afternoon in November in Clarkton, Missouri, Glenn Pruitt was standing in the entrance with Dean's body between him and the room, and his face was a thing Cody had seen only once before on the night in the garage, when he had understood for the first time that what was being planned did not include him being alive to see the end of it. Cody looked at the deputy. "My name is Cody Marlowe," he said. "I'm 9 years old. My parents died 14 months ago. My uncle Glenn Pruitt has been my guardian since then." He paused for one breath. "He broke my hip 3 months ago and told the emergency room I fell. He hasn't changed my cast in 3 months. He locks me in the garage at night. He locks the pantry. He pulled me out of school. And 6 weeks ago, I heard him say on the phone that if it looks like an accident, nobody asks questions." He pushed the key fob forward. "I took that from his coat while he was asleep. I've been waiting to give it to the right person. I wrote down what I heard. The lady at the counter has it on a napkin, and the cameras here have been running all day. The deputy looked at the key. He looked at the cast and the crutch and the wrist, where the faded bruising sat in its specific pattern. Then he stood up and reached for his radio. Outside, the parking lot lights had come on in the early dark of November. Glenn Pruitt was still in the entrance. Dean's presence between him and the room, and his face under those lights had the particular quality of a man who has told a story so many times he has forgotten. It is a story and has now encountered someone who is reading the text behind it. Ray was still at the table. He had not moved. He had said he wouldn't. The ambulance arrived without sirens. That was the first thing Cody noticed, the absence of sound. He had been bracing for it unconsciously, the way his body had learned to brace for any signal that the situation was about to change. And when the vehicle came into the parking lot with its lights rotating in silence, the quiet of it was almost more startling than noise would have been. Two paramedics came out with the unhurried efficiency of people who had learned that urgency and haste were different things. Deputy Callum had spent the past 20 minutes doing something Cody had not expected, which was sitting down across from him in the chair Dean had vacated and asking questions without a notepad visible, without the performed bureaucratic gravity that made children feel like case numbers. He had asked with his elbows on the table and his face at roughly Cody's level, making the effort of the geometry visible. He had listened the way Ray listened, and he had written afterward in the pauses with the quick compressed strokes of someone capturing material before it shifted. Ray had remained beside Cody the entire time, not between Cody and the deputy, not interposing himself in the exchange, just present in the specific way he had been present since the moment he pushed the chair out. Glenn had been moved to the parking lot. Dean and Sully had accomplished this with a low-key effectiveness that produced no scene, no raised voices, no physical confrontation, just the organized presence of multiple capable men and the eventual fact that staying inside was no longer a viable option for Glenn. He had said things about lawyers and misunderstandings. Dean had listened to all of it with the expression of someone hearing a language they have no intention of learning. A second deputy had arrived at 4:43 and taken a position near Glenn without touching him. Simply present in the official way that official presence operates. Norma had given the napkin to Sully, who had photographed it before placing it in the plastic sleeve. Sully had been making other calls quietly from the far corner near the coat hooks. Conversations conducted in the low register of men working a problem who understand that efficiency requires calm. The manager had retrieved and secured the camera footage. Two men from the chapter had positioned themselves near the entrance, not blocking, not threatening, simply constituting a fact of the room. Doc Ferris came to the table when the paramedics came in. The female paramedic, Marcy, she said, crouched beside Cody's chair and introduced herself and explained what she was going to do before she did any of it. She looked at the cast the same way Doc Ferris had looked at it, with the focused neutrality of a professional who is reading something, and when she pressed gently near the thumb, and Cody kept his face still, she looked at him directly and said, "We're taking care of this tonight, not tomorrow, tonight." She said it the way you say something to someone who has heard too many promises about things that were going to happen eventually. Doc Ferris stood nearby during the examination, adding information to what the paramedics were building the duration of the cast. The condition of the skin at the edges, the limp and its likely cause in the quiet, efficient way of a doctor who is not the primary professional in the room, but has useful information and knows how to contribute it without creating hierarchy around it. Cody watched the deputy's partner go outside and speak to Glenn and watched Glenn's face from through the window. He watched the mask work. He watched it work less effectively than it usually did. He watched the moment when Glenn understood from the specific quality of the conversation that this had crossed from being an incident to being a case, and that the difference between those two things was very large. When the paramedics were ready, Cody said he could walk. He walked with the crutch, Marcy beside him and her partner on the other side, at exactly his pace. No comment made about what that pace was. Norma was behind the counter when they passed, hands folded in front of her, looking at Cody as he went by with an expression that held several things simultaneously, some old and some new, all of them genuine. Cody stopped. She looked at him surprised. He said, "You kept the napkin." Norma's jaw tightened. Her eyes did something complicated. "Yes," she said. "That mattered," Cody said. She put one hand briefly over her mouth and then took it away and straightened and said, with the firmness of someone making a commitment out loud in order to make it real, "You come back when this is all sorted. Anything on the menu, on me." Cody said he would. I didn't know if he would, but the offer was real and deserved a real answer, and there was something in it, the simple, forward-looking nature of it, the assumption of a later in which he would be in a position to come back and choose from a menu that he wanted to take with him. He went through the door into the cold. Ray was behind him. At the ambulance, Cody stopped with his hand on the doorframe and looked back. "Will you be gone when I get back?" Ray looked at him steadily. "I'll be right behind you." Cody read his face the way he had learned to read faces, looking for what the face said when the mouth was saying something else. There was nothing else. Ray's face said exactly what his words said, which was sufficiently unusual in Cody's recent experience to be worth noting. He got in. The hospital was 12 minutes down Route 9, and the ride was quiet. Marcy monitoring him, the lights of November, Missouri, sliding past the small windows, the dark shapes of trees and the orange pools of service station lights, and the occasional pair of oncoming headlights sweeping across and gone. Cody sat with his hands in his lap and the cast resting on his knee, and he looked at the cast for most of the ride. It had been white. Now it was the color that white became when no one replaced it. It still had the signatures Marcus Webb's in blue marker, big and looping. Marcus had always written too large and had been corrected for it had taken up too much space on collaborative projects in second grade, and the size of the letters was still there, even in the fading. The other names were fading too, 10 or 12 signatures from kids who had thought a broken arm was temporary, who had not known they were signing something that would become the record of everything that did not happen next. I thought about his parents, not in the large and differentiated way that grief had operated in the first months when the absence of them was a single enormous weight that had no specific shape or texture. He thought about them the way he had been thinking about them more recently, in the specifics, the particular things that were gone because they were gone. His mother's Saturday morning pancakes, thin and crispy at the edges, not the thick, soft kind. The way she hummed songs she didn't know she was humming while she made them. His father's laugh, too large for indoor spaces, which his father was aware of and tried to moderate and mostly failed at. And the failing was something Cody had loved without having a word for what he was loving. They had been specific people in specific rooms with specific habits, and the rooms continued and the habits continued in other people's houses, and his parents did not. Glenn had never once asked him about his parents, not once in 14 months. He had never said his mother's name or his father's name. He had never asked what Cody remembered, what he missed, whether he was okay in the real sense of the question. This was Cody had come to understand information. A man who had taken a child into his home to care for that child following the death of that child's parents would have asked these things imperfectly and awkwardly or not, because the absence of asking them was too conspicuous. Glenn had not asked because Glenn's relationship with Cody was not the relationship you had with a child you were caring for. It was the relationship you had with a problem you were managing until the problem became no longer a problem. The hospital emergency entrance was lit bright white, and the sliding doors opened automatically, and the warmth inside was institutional, overheated in the way of buildings that keep the temperature high, because the people who set the thermostat are not the ones who have to sit in paper gowns. A nurse met them at the entrance with a wheelchair, not because Cody couldn't walk, but because it was protocol, and they went through to a bay with curtains and equipment that beeped in the moderate, undemanding way of things that are monitoring rather than responding. A doctor came within 15 minutes. He was in his late 50s with the measured delivery of someone who had learned that people received information best when it was delivered at a pace they could follow. He introduced himself as Dr. Alderman. He looked at the cast with an expression that was professionally neutral, but that Cody, by now quite good at reading professional neutrality, understood meant he was seeing something he had not expected to see and did not find acceptable. He asked if he could remove it. Cody said yes. The cast saw was small and loud, and Cody held himself very still while it ran along the length of the plaster, and the smell that came out when the cast split open was not pleasant and was not commented on by anyone in the room, which Cody appreciated. The nurse held the edges while Dr. Alderman eased it away, and Cody looked at his arm for the first time in 3 months and experienced something for which he did not have a single clean word, a complex mixture of relief and strangeness, something like seeing a room you have been told about for a long time and finding that it matches and doesn't match in equal measure. The arm was thinner than the other one, pale dry with a region near the wrist that was angry and a worse region near the elbow, where prolonged contact with something inside the deteriorating cast had caused ongoing damage. The nurse cleaned it gently and methodically, and Cody looked at the ceiling and used the breathing technique he had worked out in the garage. Not sophisticated, just the discovery that breath had a rhythm you could ride when everything else was outside your control. Dr. Alderman said, "We're going to take some pictures of your arm and your hip to see what's happening inside. Does that make sense?" "Yes," Cody said. "Is there anything you need first?" Cody said. "There's a man in the waiting room. His name is Ray Harlan. Can someone tell him I'm okay?" The nurse looked up. Dr. Alderman said, "Is he family?" Cody thought about this question with the care it deserved. Ray Harlan was not family in any legal or biological sense. He was a man who had pushed out a chair in a diner and said, "Sit down," who had stood where he said he would stand and done what he said he would do, who had called people who came when called, and had remained present through the entire subsequent hour without requiring anything from Cody in return. "He's the reason I'm here," Cody said. The nurse said she would go let him know. The x-rays took 40 minutes. Cody had been given a hospital gown and clean sweatpants and a heated blanket that was one of the most specifically comforting objects he had encountered in recent memory, and even total warmth that asked nothing of him in exchange for being warm. I was in the bay with the heated blanket when Deputy Callum came in with a woman in her mid-50s, short gray-brown hair, a county services jacket, a canvas bag. She moved into the bay and pulled the curtain with the practiced efficiency of someone for whom privacy was a logistical consideration as much as a courtesy. "Cody," Callum said, "this is Ellen Marsh, Child Protection. She's working with you from here." Ellen Marsh sat down without asking if it was all right, which Cody noted because every other adult today had asked. She sat as if sitting were simply the logical next action, and this read not as rudeness, but as the behavior of someone for whom the formalities were less important than the work. "I've been doing this for 22 years, she said. "I'm going to tell you what happens tonight and what happens in the next few days. You can ask me anything, and I'll tell you the truth. If I don't know something, I'll say I don't know." She told him, all of it in sequence in plain words. Tonight, medical treatment, then an emergency placement, a home, not a facility, a family that did short-term care and had been doing it for years. A bridge, not a permanent solution, but a bridge to something. A judge would review his situation within days. A children's attorney would be appointed to represent his interests, specifically not the county's, not Glenn's his. A social worker would be assigned as consistent contact. Glenn would not be able to reach him. There was a legal mechanism for this, and it would hold. He listened without interrupting. "Then what happens to Glenn?" Ellen Marsh held his gaze. "He's been detained tonight. Your statement, the physical evidence, and some additional information from the investigation gives us enough to protect you immediately. What happens after that depends on what the investigation finds and what the prosecutor decides. I won't tell you it's simple. But what you did tonight, the preparation, what you kept, what you wrote down, that matters to a prosecutor. A lot." Cody thought about the napkin. The key. The 6 weeks of saying the same sentence in his head every night so the words would not change shape. "I knew if I just said it, no one would believe me over him," he said. Ellen Marsh was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You were probably right, and you did something about it anyway. That's not a small thing." Glenn's house was being searched. Callum told him before he left briefly, factually. An investigator and two officers documenting everything. Cody thought about the garage, the deadbolt on the outside of the door, the single thin blanket, the utility sink, the dollar store workbooks in the corner, the particular quality of cold that came through the wood siding on November nights. Not temperature cold in the abstract, but specific cold with weight and texture. A cold that knew where he was and where he was not going. I thought about the sign on Glenn's front porch. White letters on a wooden plaque, the kind of thing in catalogs between the distressed wood end tables and the mason jar candles, God bless this home. He had looked at it every time he came in or out of the house. He had thought about it in the garage on cold nights, the words and what they meant, and the vast distance between what they meant and what they described. I thought they'll photograph that sign. It will be in the file. That seems right. Dr. Alderman came back with the results. The arm had been healing improperly, but with the persistence that bodies maintain toward their own repair, even in conditions designed to prevent it. There was secondary damage from the cast-wear muscle atrophy from 3 months of immobilization. Manageable. Would improve. The hip was more complicated. Dr. Alderman used careful language. Cody followed more of it than the doctor probably expected because the dollar store workbooks had included a science text with a section on the skeletal system that Cody had read multiple times in the garage, because reading about how his body worked had felt like claiming back something that had been taken from him. The hip had not healed correctly. A component of the original injury that would have been manageable with prompt treatment had become less manageable over 3 months of untreated use, and that use had created secondary damage that correct treatment would have prevented. Surgery, not tonight, not eventually, soon planned with a specific surgical approach and a course of physical therapy afterward, in a period of structured recovery. Fixable. Dr. Alderman said this word deliberately, looking at Cody's face when he said it, and the word had a specific weight in the context of a list of things that had been allowed to become unfixed for too long. Cody said, "Okay." Dr. Alderman looked at him. "Okay," he said back. Ray was in the waiting room. I was in a plastic chair with a magazine on his knee that had not been opened. When the nurse brought Cody out in the wheelchair, Ray stood up. He looked at the wheelchair, the hospital gown, the new soft cast on Cody's arm, and then at Cody's face in that order. And Cody could see him taking the inventory, not of the medical details, but of the person, the assessment of whether the person who had gotten into the ambulance was the same person now in the chair. Cody was, mostly. He was also something else, a particular exhaustion that was different from the exhaustion of too little sleep in a cold room, which was the exhaustion he was most familiar with. This was the exhaustion of having held something tightly for a very long time, and then beginning in stages to let it go, which required more than the holding had. Ray sat in the chair nearest the wheelchair rather than standing over it. They sat without speaking for a moment. The waiting room had the ambient quality of hospital waiting rooms at night, a tiredness in the quality of the light, a quiet that was not peaceful but was at least stable, the private weight of many different situations existing in proximity without touching each other. A woman across the room was knitting. A man near the muted television was asleep with his chin on his chest. Cody looked at his new cast, lighter than the old one, already cleaner. "They have to do surgery on my hip," he said. Ray said, "When?" "They need to plan it." Dr. Alderman said, "It's fixable." Ray nodded once. "I'll be at the appointments," he said. Not an offer, a statement. Cody looked at him. "You don't have to do that." "I know," Ray said in the tone of someone discussing something already settled. Cody turned back to the television. The weather map showed a system coming in from the northwest, colored shapes with arrows indicating direction and force. He thought about the garage and what would happen to it now. He thought about the next person who would sleep there. No one, probably after the investigators finished, after the documentation, after the legal instruments Ellen Marsh had described, with the calm precision of someone who had operated them for 22 years. He thought about what it meant for a room to stop being used for what it had been used for. I thought about his parents and the specifics of them, and about Marcus Webb, and whether Marcus thought about him, whether Marcus's mother had been one of the people who called the school when Cody stopped appearing, whether anyone had pushed hard enough on that door to find out what was behind it. I thought about Norma, about the 2 words she had said I should have, and what those words contained in 19 years of watching things happen, in this one afternoon of deciding to be different about what she did next. He thought about the 3 women at the third booth who had failed him at the beginning of the afternoon and then stayed and watched and had been very still at the end, who had not left. He thought about the man at the first booth who had turned his shoulder before Cody even spoke, and what that man's evening looked like now. I thought about the chair being pushed out, the specific sound of the chair legs on the linoleum, the deliberate and unhurried quality of the gesture, the absence of calculation in it. The investigation at Glenn's house ran through the evening. The investigator who opened the desk drawer in Glenn Pruitt's home office at 6:14 that evening did not say anything for a long moment. She photographed everything before she touched anything. Then she called her supervisor. In the drawer 3 trust fund statements in Cody's name with withdrawal notations in Glenn's handwriting, totaling a significant fraction of the original balance. An accidental death insurance application with Cody's name as the insured recently completed. A sealed envelope addressed to a law firm in Jefferson City. Inside the envelope was a draft document that used the phrase "in the event of the ward's death" prior to majority 6 times in 4 pages, and that proposed the transfer of the remaining trust assets to Richard Glenn Pruitt as sole beneficiary of the estate in those circumstances. Glenn had not been waiting. Glenn had been building. The Lakeport Motor Lodge had exterior cameras. The footage from the relevant period was requested and obtained and reviewed by people whose job was to understand what footage meant. Glenn's presence there on the night of the phone call was confirmed. The conversation he had on his cell phone from that location was in the records of his carrier and would eventually be part of a document that a prosecutor would read many times over the following months. The "God bless this home" sign on the front porch was photographed by the investigator before she went inside and after, and the image appeared in the documentation exactly as Cody had thought it would. Glenn Pruitt was charged. The charges were read to him in a holding room in language that was precise and legal, and that contained within its clinical structure the shape of what he had done and what he had intended to do. He did not say anything when the charges were read. His face did not perform anything in that room. Whatever expression it found was for an audience of none, which was perhaps the first time in years that had been the case. In December, on an afternoon with a thin skin of snow on the ground, and the low angle of winter light making everything look slightly unreal, Cody came out of a physical therapy session on crutches, better ones, now fitted to his actual height, and Ray was on a bench outside, the way he waited everywhere, which was without visible impatience and without his phone. Cody sat beside him. They had been doing this for 3 weeks, the appointments, the sessions, the slow and specific work of learning what his body could currently do and what it was going to be able to do with time and consistent effort. Ray had driven him to most of them in an old dark green truck with a heater that worked better on the driver's side, which Ray had mentioned on the first trip without embarrassment. The way you mention a fact about a place you know well, and had put a blanket on the passenger seat, which was a small gesture and was the kind of small gesture that Cody had learned to read accurately, not as performance but as attention, as the behavior of someone who had noticed something and acted on it without needing the action acknowledged. The physical therapy was hard, the honest version of hard, not the kind described on the motivational posters on the facility walls, with their photographs of athletes and their assertions about limits and minds. The actual version, which involves specific and unpleasant sensations and the frustrating, ongoing distance between what a body could do and what it had been able to do before damage. Cody did not complain about this. Complaining required an audience that was interested in the complaint, and it required the belief that complaining would produce results. And both of those things were beliefs that Cody was rebuilding slowly from a foundation that had been considerably reduced by 14 months of counter-evidence. I was sitting on the bench with his crutches across his knees when he said the thing he had been carrying since the diner. Why did you let me sit down? He said. Ray looked at him. Nobody else did. 3 other tables. They all said no, or they looked at me like something they didn't want to deal with. But you just pushed the chair out. You didn't ask me anything first. You didn't check if anyone was watching. He paused. Why? Ray was quiet long enough that Cody thought he might not answer. He was looking at the parking lot, at the thin snow on the asphalt, at the line of parked cars. Then he said, when I was 11 years old, I was in bad shape. He said it simply in the voice he used for things that were facts. My father was not a good man, not in the way that means someone has failings, everyone has failings. In the way that means the people near him paid a consistent, insignificant price for his being alive, and I was the one who was nearest. My mother had gone. There was no one else. By the time I was 11, I had been paying for a long time, and I was running out of something. I don't have the right word for it. The thing you have when you're small and you still believe the world might eventually organize itself in your favor. I was almost out of it. Cody listened. There was an auto repair shop near where we lived. I walked past it on the way home from school. One afternoon in October, I remember the leaves I stopped. I don't know why exactly, I just stopped. There was a man working on something inside. He looked up and he saw my face. Ray paused. Cody did not say anything. I had a black eye, Ray said. 2 days old in the yellow stage. The man didn't make a thing of it. He didn't approach me carefully or use the particular voice. He just walked to the cooler he had by the workbench and took out a can of Coke and held it out and said, "Who gave you that black eye, son?" The December parking lot was quiet. Somewhere across the street a car started and pulled out, and the sound of it decreased and left silence behind. 4 words, Ray said. Who gave you that? Not are you okay, people ask that when they don't want the real answer. Not what happened that lets you make something up. Who gave you that? The answer to that question is a name. He was asking for a name. Cody looked at his hands on the crutches. I told him, Ray said. He called the police. He stood with me until they came, and he held the Coke when I needed my hands free, and he didn't say a lot of unnecessary things, which I was grateful for. When the officer arrived, he said what he had seen and answered what was asked, and then it was done. I never saw him again. I don't know his name. I couldn't reliably identify his face now. Ray looked at Cody. But I remember that can of Coke, he said. I remember holding it. It was cold, and I had been cold for a long time, and it was a different kind of cold. A clean kind, the kind that belongs to you. Something happened in Cody's chest, not a single thing. Several things at once, the way real experiences were usually several things at once. Not entirely comfortable and not entirely sad, not identifiable as any one thing. You remembered, Cody said. Every single day, Ray said. Cody thought about this. About the man in the repair shop in October with 4 words and a can of Coke. About the long line of days between that October and this December, the decades that Ray had carried that cold can, the way Cody had carried the brass key as something that was weight and evidence and meaning all at once. He said, I'm going to remember this too. Ray looked at him. The chair, Cody said. You pushing it out. The way you said sit down, the milkshake, the way you stood where you said you were going to stand. All of it. He paused. I'm going to remember it the way you remember the Coke, so that when I'm older and I see something and I could look away from it, I'll remember. Ray held his gaze for a long moment. Something in his face tightened and then released in the way of something held with care. Okay, he said. His voice was rougher than usual in the specific way voices go rough when something is being managed in the region of the throat. They sat on the bench in the December cold for a while longer without talking, which was also the correct thing, and which Cody recognized as the correct thing, which told him something about how much had changed since the morning in November, when he had stood outside a diner counting exits and wondering if today would be the day. In February, the surgery happened. Dr. Kellner, the surgeon, precise and respectful of the complexity of what she was working with, said afterward that it had gone the way it was supposed to go, which was not easily but successfully. The hip would carry the history of what had happened to it. That was not going to change. But functional and strong were the words she used, and the limp would decrease significantly. Significantly, meaning better than this, meaningfully better, though not necessarily gone entirely. Cody considered the word significantly for a while. He had been considering language with more attention recently, the way specific words carried specific amounts of information, the way precision in language was related to precision in thinking, and both of those things were related to outcomes in the world. Significantly better than this. That was something. That was, in fact, quite a lot. Ray drove him to the first physical therapy session after the surgery. They drove in the green truck with the blanket on the passenger seat and the heater working better on the driver's side. And Cody looked out the window at February, Missouri, bare trees and gray sky, and the occasional red barn passing at highway speed, and thought about the dollar store workbooks in the garage, and about Miss Farrell from fourth grade, who had a way of explaining things that made them feel as though they had always been waiting to be understood, and about what it meant to be moving towards something rather than staying still inside something. Hyatt started at a new school in January. It was 3 miles from the emergency placement home, which was run by Darla and Pete Goss, who had been doing short-term care for 7 years. Pete made scrambled eggs every morning, slightly overdone the same way every day. And the sameness of this, the reliability of it, the eggs being what they had been the morning before, was something Cody had not anticipated valuing as much as he did. Darla drove him to appointments in a minivan that smelled of dog and contained the accumulated debris of years of temporary residence, a single mitten, a library book 3 weeks overdue, a granola bar wrapper behind the rear seat, and this too was something. Evidence of continuity, evidence that life happened here and continued happening. The school had a hallway that smelled of industrial cleaner and children's lunch, and lockers with years of names scratched into the paint, and a classroom with a teacher named Mr. Burrows, who explained things by drawing them, covering the whiteboard in quick sketches that made ideas visible. He had been told that Cody had missed a year of formal school and had responded to this information without pity or lowered expectation. He had said, well, let's find out where you are and go from there. Where Cody was turned out to be further along than anyone expected. The workbooks, the reading by whatever light came under the garage door. The long nights of thinking, the practice of holding a problem in mind and working it from multiple angles until something gave, which was its own education, unaccredited and without curriculum, but real. Mr. Burrows said on the third day, you see things quickly. Cody said, I've had a lot of time to practice. In February, between the surgery and the first session of post-surgical therapy, Ray drove Cody back to the Millhaven Diner on a Tuesday afternoon. Norma was behind the counter. She saw them come in through the door, and she didn't say anything. She just turned to the kitchen window and called the order through before they had reached a table. Cheeseburger, fries, chocolate shake. She remembered. They sat in a booth near the window. Not the back corner. That table was occupied by a man reading a newspaper. And in any case, the back corner was no longer the only safe place in the room. Norma brought the food and set it down with the same precision as before, and did not make a speech about it, which Cody appreciated. She put the ketchup beside the fries without being asked, and went back to the counter. Cody ate the way you eat when you know there will be more food after this, which was differently than he had eaten in November, still efficiently, still attentively, but with the specific quality of someone who is paying attention to the food, because the food deserves attention, not because its continuation is uncertain. The milkshake was the same, cold and real and belonging entirely to the moment in which it existed. Ray sat across from him and drank coffee and did not require conversation, which was a quality in him that Cody had come to understand was not emptiness, but a kind of respect, the respect of someone who understood that not every moment needed to be filled. Before they left, Cody stopped at the counter. Norma looked at him. He said, I came back. She looked at him for a moment. You did, she said. Then she slid a piece of pie across the counter apple with the particular lattice crust that suggested someone had taken their time with it and said, on the house, the first visit was supposed to be on me, but I think this one is more important. Cody looked at the pie. I thought about all the things that had been on the other side of one door being pushed open, one chair being pushed out, one person looking at the actual thing in front of them, and deciding that it was worth responding to. He thought about how none of it had been guaranteed, how any of the calculations at any of the points could have gone differently. A different diner, a different table. A man who had not stopped at an auto repair shop on a particular October afternoon because a stranger had held out a cold can and asked 4 words. He thought about the vast improbability of the specific chain of things that had to happen for him to be sitting on a stool at a diner counter in February, eating apple pie with a new cast, in a surgery healing correctly, in a school and eggs in the morning, and a truck that would come when he needed it. I thought you don't know what travels forward. I thought you never know what the thing you did or didn't do is going to become in someone else's life, how far it will carry, what shape it will take. The man in the repair shop didn't know. Norma hadn't known when she chose not to go outside on a November afternoon and ask why a boy was standing at the door. And then she had known, and the knowing had changed what she did next. That was the thing. You could be in the middle of not having done the right thing and then do it anyway. A later start, but still a start. He ate the pie. On a Thursday morning in late March, the first warm day of spring, finding its way through the classroom windows, Mr. Burrows asked the class to write about something they had learned recently. Not from a book from their life. Something that had changed the way they understood things. Cody sat with his pencil. He wrote the scariest looking person in the room is usually not the most dangerous one. He looked at it. He wrote the most dangerous ones always smile first. He read that back. He wrote what matters is whether they push out the chair. Then he sat with the pencil for a moment and wrote the last line, and whether they stay. I was in grade 4. His name was Cody Marlowe. He was 9 years old, and then in April he was 10, an ordinary thing, and also not ordinary at all, a mark on a line that had not always seemed certain to continue. The limp was better. The arm was strong. He had learned the names of 13 kids in his class and the geography of the hallways, which exit was nearest to which bathroom had the broken soap dispenser, where Mr. Burrows kept the extra pencils for when yours broke. He still counted the exits. He always would. That was the part that didn't go away, the habit of the 10 seconds at the door, the reading of a room before entering it. But what the 10 seconds meant had changed. It used to mean finding the safest path through a space that was probably not safe. Now it meant something broader, reading all of it. The whole room, every face knowing that any one of them might be the one who pushes out the chair. That the person who looks like they have nothing to offer might be exactly the person. That the calculation of who to approach and who to trust was never as simple as it appeared from outside the moment of needing to make it. I thought about Norma, who would be behind her counter right now, Thursday morning coffee pot in hand, keeping the history of the room, the way people who stay in one place long enough keep it everything that has happened there available in their memory, if anyone thought to ask. He thought about Dean Rourke, who had sat across from him with his hands flat and visible, and had taken the key fob and held it like something that had earned careful handling. He thought about Sully Greer, who had written things down and put them in plastic sleeves, and understood that the first requirement of evidence was preservation. He thought about Doc Ferris, who had looked at a 3-month-old cast and said tonight in a tone that meant it. I thought about the man in the auto repair shop, whose name Ray didn't know, who had held out a can of Coke to an 11-year-old boy on an October afternoon and asked 4 words that were the right 4 words, and who had probably not thought about it often, since probably did not know what happened. After probably had no idea that the boy had grown into a 58-year-old man who pushed out chairs in diners because of what a cold can felt like in a hot hand. That was the thing. You didn't know what traveled forward. You didn't know what shape it took in the life it moved into, how far it went, what it produced. The man in the garage didn't know. He had done a thing and it had traveled forward in ways he could not have predicted and would never learn. That was not a small thing. That was in fact the whole of it, the whole architecture of how one person's action inside one moment moved through time and became something else entirely in someone else's life, and how that something else became what they did in the next moment, and the one after that, and how the chain of it extended in directions no one who started it could have seen. Cody finished his pencil paragraph. He read it over. He thought it was true.